The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic one final time.
At 28 years old,
he had been serving as one of the Queen's Guard for nearly 6 years, and the routine had become as natural as breathing. Stand perfectly still, eyes forward, ignore all distractions. These were the unbreakable rules that governed every moment of his duty. But today felt different somehow, as James took his position. Outside the palace gates, he noticed an unusual buzz of activity among the tourists gathering for the morning ceremony. Families with cameras, tour guides speaking in multiple languages, and children pressing their faces against the iron bars, all standard sights that he had trained himself to see without really seeing. James had learned early in his career that being a Queen's Guard meant becoming a living statue. Tourists would wave, make faces, tell jokes, and sometimes even try to touch him, but his job was to remain completely motionless and silent. It was harder than most people realized. The heavy bearskin hat weighed nearly 2 pounds, the wool. Uniform was sweltering in summer and freezing in winter, and standing perfectly still for hours required incredible discipline and physical strength. His fellow guards often joked that they were like the palace. Decorations noticed but not really seen as real people. James had made peace with this long ago. There was honor in serving the crown, pride in being part of a tradition that stretched back centuries, satisfaction in knowing he was protecting something greater than himself. The morning progressed. Normally, James watched as the usual parade of tourists took their photos. Children pointed at his tall hat. Families posed for selfies with the palace in the background. He had developed a talent for listening to conversations without appearing to hear anything. Over the years, he had picked up fragments of hundreds of languages and thousands of stories from visitors around the world. Around 11 o'clock, James noticed a small commotion near the gates. A family was approaching, parents in their 30s, an older woman who looked like a grandmother and a little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. But something about this family was different from the usual tourists. The little girl was completely bald, wearing a bright pink hat that couldn't quite hide the fact that she had no hair. She was thin, much thinner than a healthy child her age should be, and she moved slowly, as if every step required effort. But despite her obvious illness, her eyes sparkled with excitement as she looked up at the palace. "Look, Emma," her mother said, kneeling down to the child's level. "There are the Queen's Guards, just like in the storybooks we read." Emma's face lit up with wonder. "Mummy, they're so tall. And look at their funny hats." Her voice was small, but filled with delight. "Do you think they know the Queen personally?" James felt something stir in his chest, though his expression remained perfectly neutral. There was something about this little girl's voice, about the pure joy in her face despite her obvious illness, that touched him in a way he hadn't expected. The family approached closer to the gates, and James could hear more of their conversation. The father was explaining the history of the guards, while the grandmother took photo after photo of Emma, pointing at the palace. Emma herself seemed fascinated by everything, the changing of the guard ceremony that had just finished, the ornate architecture, and most of all the stoic guards in their red uniforms. "Daddy?" Emma asked, tugging on her father's sleeve. "Why don't they move or talk? Are they real people?" Her father chuckled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, they're real people. But they have a very important job protecting the Queen, so they have to stand very still and be very serious." Emma nodded gravely, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her 7-year-old mind. She walked closer to James's position, studying him with the intense curiosity that only children possess. James could see her clearly now without moving his eyes. She was even smaller up close, and he could see the dark circles under her bright eyes, the pale complexion that spoke of long hours spent indoors, probably in hospitals. But there was something undeniably spirited about her, a light that illness hadn't managed to dim. "Hello, Mr. Guard," Emma said quietly, though loudly enough for James to hear clearly. "My name is Emma, and I'm 6 3/4 years old. I'm visiting London with my family because the doctor said I might not get another chance to travel." James felt his heart clench, though his face remained impassive. The casual way she mentioned her uncertain future, the matter-of-fact acceptance in her young voice, it was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Emma's mother quickly moved closer, Emma, honey, remember what we talked about? The guards can't talk while they're working. They have very important rules to follow. I know, Mummy, Emma replied, still looking up at James with fascination, but I wanted him to know my name anyway, just in case he was curious. The family spent the next 20 minutes taking photos and exploring the area around the palace gates. Emma peppered her parents with questions about everything she saw, her enthusiasm never wavering despite the visible effort it took her to keep up with the adults. James found himself paying attention to their conversation, in a way he never had. With tourists before, Emma was clearly very ill. The adults spoke in careful, gentle tones and frequently asked if she needed to rest. But the little girl herself seemed determined to experience everything the day had to offer. Can we stay a little longer? Emma asked, as her family began to move away from the gates. I like watching the guards. They're like real-life toy soldiers, but better because they're actual people, with feelings and families and everything. Was struck by the wisdom in her simple observation. How many thousands of people had looked at him over the years and seen only a uniform, a tourist attraction, a living statue. But this little girl, despite her age and illness, had immediately recognized his humanity as the family prepared to leave. Emma turned back toward James one more time. She waved enthusiastically, even though she knew he couldn't wave back, and called out, "Goodbye, Mr. Guard. Thank you for protecting the Queen." And she paused and added something that made James's chest tighten with emotion. I hope you have a really good day, and I hope someone tells you that you're doing a great job, because I think you are. After the family disappeared into the crowd, James continued his duty as if nothing had happened. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Emma's innocent words had reminded him of something he had forgotten over the years of rigid protocol and professional detachment, that even in the most formal roles, human connections could find a way to matter. The rest of his shift passed slowly, but James found his thoughts returning again and again to the little girl with the bright pink hat and the indomitable spirit. Her casual mention of not having another chance to travel haunted him, but so did her joy, her curiosity, and her instinctive kindness toward a stranger whose job it was to ignore her completely. When his replacement arrived that evening, James walked home through the London streets with Emma's words echoing in his mind. I hope someone tells you that you're doing a great job. When was the last time anyone had said something like that to him? When was the last time he had felt truly seen as a person rather than just a uniform? That night, as James removed his red tunic and hung it carefully in his wardrobe, he made a decision that would have surprised his former self. If Emma and her family returned to the palace, and somehow he had a feeling they would, he would find a way to let that brave little girl know that her kindness had been received and appreciated, even if it meant bending the rules he had followed so faithfully for 6 long years. 3 days later, James was back at his post when he spotted a familiar pink hat in the crowd. His heart began to beat faster, though his expression remained perfectly composed. Emma had returned, and this time she looked even smaller and more fragile than before. Her family surrounded her protectively, and James could see that the few days since their first visit had taken a visible toll on the little girl. Emma was moving more slowly now, leaning heavily on her father's hand as they approached the palace gates. Her skin was paler, and there were new shadows under her eyes, but her smile remained as bright as ever when she caught sight of the guards. "Look!" she exclaimed, her voice weaker, but still filled with excitement. "It's the same guards as last time. Well, maybe not the same exact people, but they look the same. Do you think they remember us, Daddy?" James wanted desperately to somehow signal that yes, he remembered her, that her visit 3 days ago had affected him more than any interaction he'd had in years of service. But the rules were clear, and his training was strong. He remained motionless, though every fiber of his being wanted to acknowledge this brave little girl, Emma's mother. Sarah was speaking quietly to her husband. "The doctors said today might be our last day out for a while," she murmured, thinking Emma couldn't hear. "The new treatment starts tomorrow, and she'll be too weak to leave the hospital for at least 2 weeks. But Emma had heard, and James saw her small shoulders straighten with determination. "Then we have to make today extra special," she announced. I want to tell the Queen's Guard all about my adventure in London, so he can remember it even when I can't come visit anymore. James felt a lump forming in his throat. The casual way Emma spoke about her uncertain future, the courage with which she faced each day, it was humbling, inspiring in equal measure. The family settled into a spot directly in front of James's position. Emma's grandmother spread a small blanket on the ground, and Emma sat cross-legged, looking up at James as if he were the most fascinating person in the world. "Hello again, Mr. Guard," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "I'm back. Did you miss me?" "I missed you. I've been in the hospital for the last 3 days, and it was very boring. The nurses are nice, but they don't wear fancy hats like you do." James had to fight to keep his expression neutral. This little girl was undergoing treatment that was clearly difficult and exhausting. Yet she had chosen to spend what might be her last day of freedom visiting him. Emma continued talking, apparently unbothered by his silence. "I learned some things about guards while I was in the hospital. My daddy brought me books about the Queen's Guard. And I know now that you've been protecting the royal family for hundreds and hundreds of years. That must be very important work." She paused, seeming to consider something carefully. "Think. You're very brave," she said finally, "standing here every day, keeping everyone safe, even when people try to make you laugh or move. I couldn't do that. I'm brave about some things, like when the doctors have to give me medicine that tastes yucky or when they need to take more tests. But I don't think I could stand perfectly still for hours and hours." James was amazed by her maturity. At 6 years old, Emma understood concepts of duty and sacrifice that many adults never grasped. Her illness had clearly given her a perspective on life that was far beyond her years. Emma's father knelt beside her. "Sweetheart, would you like to take some photos with the guard in the background? We could send them to Grandpa John back home." "Yes." Emma clapped her hands together, then immediately looked concerned. "But I don't want to bother him. He's working very hard." Sarah smiled at her daughter's consideration. "I don't think he'll mind, honey. People take photos here every day." As her family arranged the photo shoot, Emma kept up a steady stream of chatter directed at James. She told him about the other places they had visited in London, the Tower Bridge, Big Ben, and a special children's hospital where she had met other kids who were sick like her. There was a boy named Timothy who's 8 years old, Emma shared. "He told me that being sick makes you appreciate happy moments more because you know how special they are. I think he's very smart. This moment right now, talking to you, is definitely a happy moment I want to remember forever." James felt his professional composure wavering. This little girl, facing circumstances that would break many adults, was teaching him about gratitude and joy. Her simple wisdom was more profound than any philosophy he had studied. Emma's grandmother was taking photo after photo, capturing Emma's animated conversation with the motionless guard. "She's been talking about this visit for 3 days, the older woman told Sarah quietly. "She insisted we come back before the next round of treatment starts. The doctors say this treatment is her best chance," Sarah replied, her voice tight with worry, "but it's going to be very difficult for her. I think she knows that, even though we've tried to explain it in ways she can understand." Emma, who had been listening despite her family's attempts at discretion, turned to address James directly. "Mr. Guard, I have to go back to the hospital tomorrow for more medicine. The doctors say it might make me feel very sick for a while, and I might not be able to visit you again for a long time." James felt his heart breaking as Emma continued. Her young voice mattered, a fact about circumstances no child should face. "But I wanted you to know that meeting you has been one of the best parts of my whole London adventure. Even though you can't talk back, I can tell you're a good person. Mummy says that kindness shows in people's eyes, and you have very kind eyes." The little girl stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She walked as close to James as the barriers would allow, and looked up at him with complete trust and affection. "Hey, no, you have to follow very important rules," Emma said softly. "But if you ever think about me after I leave, I want you to know that I think you're the best Queen's Guard in the whole world. And if you ever feel sad or lonely while you're standing here, remember that there's a little girl named Emma who thinks you're a hero." James was struggling to maintain his composure. Every rule of his training demanded that he remain silent and motionless. But every instinct of his heart was telling him that this moment called for something more than protocol. Emma's family began to gather their things, preparing for their departure. The little girl took one last long look at James, memorizing his face as if she wanted to carry the image with her through whatever lay ahead. "Goodbye, Mr. Guard," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting me tell you about my adventure. Thank you for being so strong and brave. And thank you for protecting the Queen and everyone in London, including me and my family." As the family began to walk away, Emma turned back one more time. "I hope I'll see you again someday," she called out. "But if I don't, please remember that you made a little girl very happy just by being exactly who you are." James watched as Emma disappeared into the crowd, her bright pink hat visible until the very last moment. His hands trembled slightly inside his white gloves, and he had to take several deep breaths to maintain his stoic expression. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. Emma's words, her courage, her simple acceptance of life's hardships, combined with her determination to find joy, it had awakened something in James that years of military training had buried. For the first time in his career, he found himself questioning whether the rules that governed his behavior were more important than the human connections that gave life meaning. As his shift continued, James made a decision that would have shocked his commanding officers. If Emma returned, and he desperately hoped she would, he would find a way to let her know that her words had been heard, that her courage had inspired him, and that she had given him far more than he could ever give back. The rules be damned. Some things were more important than protocol, and Emma had reminded him what those things were. 2 weeks passed without any sign of Emma and her family. James found himself scanning the crowds each day, hoping to catch a glimpse of that distinctive pink hat. But the palace grounds filled and emptied with the usual parade of tourists, none of whom seemed to notice him as anything more than a uniformed fixture. During those 2 weeks, James couldn't stop thinking about Emma's words. Her simple observation that he had kind eyes had stayed with him, making him more aware of how he looked at the world around him. Her courage in the face of such overwhelming challenges had put his own daily complaints into perspective. Could he ever again feel sorry for himself, about standing in the rain or dealing with difficult tourists, when a 6-year-old girl was fighting for her life with such grace and determination? James had begun to research childhood cancer during his off-duty hours, trying to understand what Emma might be going through. The more he learned, the more amazed he became by her spirit. The treatments were harsh, the side effects devastating, and the uncertainty must have been terrifying for someone so young. Yet Emma had focused on bringing joy to others, even to a stranger who couldn't respond to her kindness. On a gray Thursday morning, James was adjusting to his position when he noticed an unusual level of activity near the palace medical station. Several staff members were moving with purpose, and he could see what looked like a small wheelchair being prepared. His heart began to race as he wondered if somehow, impossibly, Emma might be returning. 20 minutes later, his hopes were confirmed, and his heart was broken simultaneously. Emma's family appeared at the gates, but the little girl who had walked slowly but proudly just 2 weeks earlier was now confined to a wheelchair. Looking impossibly small and fragile, Emma was wearing the same bright pink hat, but it couldn't hide how much the treatment had affected her. She was even thinner than before. Her skin had a translucent quality that spoke of weeks spent indoors under harsh hospital lights, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing significant pain. But when Emma caught sight of James in his familiar position, her face lit up with the same radiant smile he remembered. Despite everything she had been through, despite how obviously difficult this outing was for her, she had insisted on coming back to see him. "Mr. Guard," Emma called out, her voice weaker, but still filled with joy. "I told you I'd try to come back. The doctors said I could have one special outing this week if I promised to rest afterwards, and this is what I wanted to do most." James felt tears threatening behind his stoic expression. This brave little girl had used her one precious day of freedom to come see him. The weight of that gesture was almost overwhelming. Emma's wheelchair was positioned directly in front of James, close enough that he could see every detail of her thin face and bright, determined eyes. Her mother and grandmother flanked her protectively, while her father knelt beside the wheelchair, one hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. "I have so much to tell you about the hospital," Emma began, launching into her story with the same enthusiasm she had shown during her previous visits, though her voice now required more effort. "The nurses are very nice, but they worry about me too much. I keep telling them that I'm braver than I look, but they still check on me every hour." James listened to every word, his heart aching with each pause Emma took to catch her breath. The treatment had clearly been difficult, but she spoke about it as if it were just another adventure, another challenge to overcome. "There's a playroom at the hospital," Emma continued, "and I met lots of other children who are sick like me. We have a club now, the Brave Kids Club, I named it. We tell each other stories and jokes, and we remind each other that being sick doesn't mean we can't still have fun and be kind to people." James was struck once again by Emma's wisdom. Even in her darkest moments, she was finding ways to help others, creating community and spreading hope among children. Facing similar battles, Emma's mother leaned down to whisper something in her daughter's ear, probably reminding her not to tire herself out with too much talking, but Emma shook her head gently. "Mummy, I need to tell Mr. Guard about the most important thing," Emma said, looking up at James with serious eyes. "While I was in the hospital, I learned something very special about heroes." James found himself leaning forward slightly, though. He maintained his rigid posture. Emma's voice grew softer, more thoughtful. "I used to think heroes were people who did big, exciting things like saving people from burning buildings or fighting dragons. But I learned that heroes are also people who do important jobs every single day, even when it's hard and even when no one notices how difficult it is." She paused to take a shaky breath, then continued. "The nurses who take care of sick children are heroes. The doctors who work all night to help people feel better are heroes. And the Queen's Guards who protect everyone and stand strong, no matter what weather or how long it takes, they're heroes too." James felt something crack inside his chest. This little girl, who was facing the fight of her life, had somehow found the strength to see him, to really see him in a way that no one had in years. "I want you to know," Emma said, her voice growing even quieter, "that even if you never do anything else in your whole life except stand here and be strong and protect people, you're still my hero, because you're doing something I could never do, and you're doing it perfectly every single day." Emma's father cleared his throat softly. "Sweetheart, we should probably start heading back soon. You need to rest before your appointment this afternoon." But Emma held up a small, thin hand. "Just one more minute, Daddy. I have something very important to give to Mr. Guard." James watched as Emma reached into a small bag hanging from her wheelchair. She pulled out what looked like a folded piece of paper and a small object wrapped in colorful tissue. "I made something for you while I was in the hospital," Emma announced. "The art teacher helped me, but I did most of it myself. I wanted you to have something to remember me by, and something that might make you smile when you have to stand here for a long time." Emma's father took the items from her hands and approached the barrier as closely as protocol would allow. He placed them on the ground just inside the fence line, close enough for James to see clearly, but respectful of the boundaries that governed the guard's position. "I drew you a picture," Emma explained, though James couldn't pick up the items. "While on duty, it's you in your uniform. But I drew you smiling because I wanted to show how I see you, not just as a serious guard, but as a kind person who makes people feel safe and protected." James could see the edge of the drawing from his position. Colorful crayon marks that showed a figure in red with a tall black hat, surrounded by hearts and stars. A child's drawing, simple but created with such love and care that it was more precious than any masterpiece. "And the other thing," Emma continued, "is a little toy soldier that looks like a Queen's Guard. I found it in the hospital gift shop, and I thought you might like having a tiny friend to keep you company during your long shifts. Even if you can't look at him while you're working, you'll know he's there." James could see the small figure wrapped in tissue paper, probably a miniature version of himself, a token that this extraordinary child had chosen specifically with him in mind. Emma looked up at James with eyes that seemed far too wise for her age. "I don't know if I'll be able to come back and visit you again," she said quietly. "The doctors say my treatment is going to take a very long time, and some days I'll be too tired to leave the hospital. But I want you to know that talking To you has been one of the most special things about my whole London adventure." James felt his professional composure cracking. Every rule of his training told him to remain silent and motionless. But every instinct of his heart told him that this moment, this brave little girl, deserved more than rigid protocol. Emma smiled up at him one last time. "Even if you can't say anything back to me, I can tell by your eyes that you're listening and that you care. That's enough. It's more than enough." As her family began to prepare for departure, Emma whispered something so softly that James had to strain to hear. "Be brave, Mr. Guard, just like you're teaching me to be brave." And in that moment, as James watched the most courageous person he had ever met being wheeled away, possibly forever, he made a decision that would change everything. Protocol and rules suddenly seemed far less important than making sure this incredible little girl knew that her courage had been witnessed. Her kindness had been received, and her impact on his life would never be forgotten. For the first time, in 6 years of service, Sergeant James Mitchell was about to break protocol in the most meaningful way possible. As Emma's family reached the outer edge of the crowd, James made the most difficult decision of his military career. Everything in his training screamed against what he was about to do, but everything in his heart told him it was the only right choice. This little girl had given him more courage, wisdom, and perspective in 3 brief encounters than he had gained in 6 years of service. She deserved to know that her words had mattered. James took a deep breath and did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. He broke his rigid stance, turned slightly toward the departing family, called out in a clear, strong voice that carried across the courtyard, "Emma." The entire crowd turned in shock. Tourists stopped mid-sentence, cameras lowered, and a hush fell over the normally bustling area outside the palace gates. Emma's wheelchair came to an immediate stop, and the little girl's eyes went wide with amazement. James stepped forward. Moving away from his post for the first time during duty in his entire career, his fellow guards looked on in stunned silence, knowing that what they were witnessing would have serious consequences, but also sensing that something extraordinary was happening. "Emma," James said again, his voice softer now, but still clearly audible to everyone present. "Thank you." The little girl's face transformed with pure joy. Her mouth fell open in surprise, then curved into the most radiant smile James had ever seen. Tears of happiness began streaming down her thin cheeks as she realized that the guard she had come to love was actually speaking to her. "You can talk," Emma exclaimed, her weak voice carrying a note of wonder that made every person in the crowd smile. "I knew you were a real person. I knew it." James felt his own eyes filling with tears as he walked closer to Emma's position. The crowd was parting respectfully, sensing they were witnessing something special and beautiful. Even the other tourists seemed to understand that this was a moment that transcended normal protocol. "Want you to know," James said, kneeling, "down to Emma's eye level, that you are the bravest, kindest, most inspiring person I have ever met. In 6 years of standing guard, no one has ever touched my heart the way you have." Emma's parents were crying now too, overwhelmed by the guard's unexpected gesture and the obvious impact their daughter had made on this stoic soldier. Her grandmother was frantically taking pictures, trying to capture every moment of this magical encounter. "You really listened to me?" Emma asked, her voice filled with childlike wonder. "All those times I was talking to you, you really heard what I was saying?" "Every single word," James confirmed, "and every word made me a better person. You taught me about courage, Emma. You taught me about finding joy, even when things are difficult. You reminded me why my job matters, and you showed me what real strength looks like." Emma reached out her small hand, and James gently took it in his much larger one. "I was scared you wouldn't remember me," she whispered. "I could never forget you," James replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You changed my life, Emma. You made me remember that being human is just as important as following rules." The crowd around them had grown larger, with people stopping too. Watch this unprecedented scene unfold. But instead of feeling like an intrusion, their presence felt supportive. As if everyone recognized they were witnessing something beautiful and rare, Emma looked up at her parents, then back at James. "Daddy, can I give Mr. Guard a hug? I know he's supposed to be very serious and professional, but I think today might be special enough for just one hug." Emma's father looked at James questioningly. James nodded without hesitation. "I would be honored to receive a hug from the bravest girl in London," said Dot. Emma struggled slightly to rise from her wheelchair, and James quickly moved to support her. When she was standing, she wrapped her thin arms around his neck and hugged him with all the strength her small body could muster. James hugged her back gently, careful of her fragile condition, but wanting her to feel how much her friendship meant to him. "You smell like soap and polish," Emma giggled into his ear. "It's very clean and official. It's just like I imagined a Queen's Guard would smell." James laughed, actually laughed, while still in uniform, still technically on duty. The sound echoed across the courtyard. Several people in the crowd began applauding spontaneously. When Emma sat back down in her wheelchair, she looked up at James with shining eyes. "Are you going to get in trouble for talking to me?" she asked with concern. James considered the question seriously. "Probably," he admitted. "But some things are more important than rules. And making sure you know how special you are is definitely more important than any rule." Emma's mother stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Sergeant," she said, reading his rank from his uniform, "I cannot tell you what this means to our family. Emma has talked about you every single day since our first visit. Given her something to look forward to, something to smile about during the hardest time of her life. She's given me far more than I could ever give her," James replied. "Your daughter has taught me lessons I'll carry for the rest of my life." Emma's father cleared his throat emotionally. "Sergeant, we don't know what the future holds for Emma. The doctors are hopeful, but her treatment is very aggressive and will take many months. Is there any way we could stay in touch? Emma would love to send you letters about her progress." James felt his heart swell. "I would love nothing more than to receive letters from Emma," he said. "And I promise I'll write back, even if I'm not very good with words compared to this eloquent young lady." Emma clapped her hands together weakly. "Really? You'll be my pen?" "Pal, that's the best present anyone has ever given me." One of James's fellow guards approached carefully. Sergeant Williams, a senior officer, looked concerned, but not angry. "Mitchell," he said quietly, "Command is asking for you. They want to understand what's happening here." James nodded, understanding that his career might be over, but feeling strangely at peace with that possibility. "I'll be right there, Sergeant." "Williams." He turned back to Emma one final time. "I have to go talk to my commanding officers now," he explained. "They need to understand why I broke protocol. But before I go, I want you to promise me something." Emma nodded eagerly. "Promise me you'll keep being brave," James said. "Promise me you'll keep fighting, and keep being kind to everyone around you. The world needs more people like you, Emma. We all need your light. I promise," Emma said solemnly. "And you promise me you'll remember that you're a hero, even if other people don't always tell you so." "I promise," James replied. As James stood to leave, Emma called out one more thing. "Sergeant James. That's your name, right? I saw it on your uniform." "That's right, Emma. Sergeant James Mitchell." "Well, Sergeant James Mitchell," Emma said with a grin, "you're officially my very best friend in all of London. And if anyone asks why you talked to me today, you can tell them it was because sometimes the most important thing a guard can do is guard people's hearts, not just their safety." James smiled as he walked away, Emma's words echoing in his mind. Whatever consequences awaited him, whatever disciplinary action he might face, it was worth it to see the joy on Emma's face and to know that he had given her a memory that would sustain her through the difficult times ahead behind him. He could hear Emma excitedly telling her family about their conversation, her voice filled with happiness and wonder. And for the first time in his military career, James knew without a doubt that he had done exactly the right thing, regardless of what the rule book said. As he approached his commanding officers, James carried with him not just the memory of Emma's courage, but a new understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect. Sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons or protocols, but with compassion, recognition, and the willingness to see the humanity in every person who crossed your path. James stood at attention in Colonel Harrison's office, his red tunic perfectly pressed despite the emotional turmoil of the past hour. The colonel sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, studying a file that James assumed contained his service. Record in details about the unprecedented breach of protocol that had just occurred. Colonel Harrison was a career military man, 30 years of service etched into the lines of his weathered face. He had seen everything the Queen's Guard could offer: perfect ceremonies, diplomatic incidents, security threats, and the occasional tourist mishap. But in all his years of command, he had never dealt with anything quite like this. "Sergeant Mitchell," the colonel began, his voice measured and professional, "in 6 years of exemplary service, you have never received so much as a minor reprimand. Your record is spotless, your dedication unquestionable, and your fellow guards speak of you with the highest respect." James remained silent, knowing that the colonel's measured tone likely preceded a significant disciplinary action, which is why the colonel continued. "What happened today is so completely out of character that I'm struggling to understand it. You abandoned your post, broke centuries of protocol, and created a public spectacle in front of dozens of witnesses and tourists with cameras." James felt his heart sink, though he kept his expression neutral. He had known this conversation was coming, had prepared himself for the consequences. But hearing it laid out so starkly still stung. Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving James's face. "Before I make any decisions about disciplinary action, I need you to explain to me in your own words exactly what happened out there and why you felt it was necessary to abandon every principle of conduct that governs our service." James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, 3 weeks ago, I met a little girl named Emma who was visiting the palace with her family. She was clearly very ill, undergoing cancer treatment, but she showed more courage and kindness than I've witnessed in years of service." The colonel nodded slightly, indicating James should continue. "Over the course of 3 visits, Emma shared her story with me while I maintained proper protocol and remained silent. She spoke about her treatment, her fears, her hopes, and somehow managed to find joy and wonder in everything around her, despite facing circumstances that would break most adults." James paused, gathering his thoughts. Today was likely her last visit for many months, possibly her last visit ever, sir. She used her 1 day of freedom from the hospital to come see me, and she brought gifts she had made during her treatment. She told me I was her hero, that our encounters had been the highlight of her London experience. Colonel Harrison's expression was unreadable, but James detected a slight softening around his eyes. "Sir, I realized in that moment that Emma had given me more than I could ever give her. She had reminded me why our service matters, shown me what real courage looks like, and taught me lessons about dignity and grace under pressure that no military training could provide." James met his commanding officer's gaze directly. "I broke protocol, sir, because some things are more important than rules. That little girl needed to know that her words had been heard, that her courage had been witnessed, and that she had made a difference in at least one person's life." The office fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Colonel Harrison continued to study James's face, as if trying to read the sincerity of his words. "Sergeant Mitchell," the colonel said finally, "you understand that what you did today goes against everything we stand for as the Queen's Guard. Our entire tradition is built on discipline, protocol, and the ability to maintain our duties regardless of personal circumstances or emotions." "Yes, sir, I understand that completely. You also understand that your actions today could set a dangerous precedent. If every guard felt free to abandon their post whenever they encountered a touching personal story, our entire system would collapse. I understand that as well, sir." Colonel Harrison stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard. James could see tourists still gathered where the remarkable scene had unfolded just an hour earlier. "What you may not understand, Sergeant," the colonel said without turning around, "is that in the hour since your incident, my office has received 17 phone calls, 43 emails, and countless social media messages about what happened between you and that little girl." James felt his stomach clench, imagining the complaints and criticisms that must have poured in about his unprofessional behavior. Colonel Harrison turned back to face him. "Every single one of those communications was positive, Sergeant. Every one. People calling you a hero, praising the Queen's Guard for showing humanity and compassion, saying they've never been more proud to be British." James blinked in surprise, not having expected this turn in the conversation. The palace press office is fielding interview requests from major news outlets wanting to tell the story of the guard who broke protocol to comfort a sick child. Social media is exploding with photos and videos of your interaction with Emma, and the commentary is overwhelmingly supportive. The colonel returned to his desk and opened a laptop computer. Let me read you just one example. This is from Emma's father, posted on his social media account less than 30 minutes ago. James listened as Colonel Harrison read, "Today, eh? Queen's Guard, named Sergeant James Mitchell, did something that restored my faith in humanity. My 6-year-old daughter Emma, who is battling cancer, has visited the palace several times over the past few weeks. She's been telling this guard her stories, sharing her fears and hopes, treating him like a friend even though he couldn't respond. Today, knowing it might be her last visit for months, Sergeant Mitchell broke protocol to let Emma know that her words had been heard and that her courage had inspired him. In 6 years of service, he had never broken protocol. But today, he chose compassion over rules, and he gave my daughter a memory that will sustain her through the difficult treatment ahead. This is what true service looks like. Not just protecting people's physical safety, but protecting their spirits and showing them they matter." James felt tears threatening again, overwhelmed by the father's words and the unexpected support. "Colonel." Harrison closed the laptop and looked directly at James. "The Queen's private secretary has also been in touch, Sergeant. Her Majesty has been made aware of today's events." The Queen herself knew about his breach of protocol. His career was surely over now. "Her Majesty," the colonel continued, "has requested a private audience with you tomorrow morning. She wants to meet the guard, who reminded the world that duty and compassion are not mutually exclusive." James stared at his commanding officer in shock, unable to process what he was hearing. Furthermore, Colonel Harrison said, a slight smile finally breaking through his stern expression, "The Queen has specifically requested that you be assigned to a new position, one that will allow you to interact with visiting children and families who might benefit from the kind of compassion you showed Emma today." James felt his knees go weak. Instead of being court-martialed, he was being promoted to a position that would allow him to do more of what had gotten him in trouble in the first place. "There will be new protocols, of course," the colonel added. "Guidelines for when and how such interactions can take place. But the Queen believes, and I agree, that what happened today represents the very best of what the Queen's Guard can be." James struggled to find his voice. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I expected to be dismissed from service." Colonel Harrison stood and extended his hand to James. "What you can say, Sergeant, is that you'll continue to serve with the same courage and compassion you showed today. Emma may have taught you about bravery, but you've taught all of us about the true meaning of service." As James shook his commanding officer's hand, he thought about Emma. Probably back in her hospital room by now, hopefully sharing the story of their magical encounter with the nurses and other young patients. "One more thing, Sergeant Colonel," Harrison said as James prepared to leave. Emma's father left his contact information. The family would very much like to stay in touch, and Emma has already started working on her first letter to you. James smiled broadly, the first genuine smile he had allowed himself since the encounter began. "I would be honored to correspond." "With Emma, sir? She has more wisdom to share than most people learn in a lifetime." As James left the colonel's office, he felt transformed. What had started as a day that might end his career had instead become the day that gave his career true meaning. Emma's courage had not only changed his perspective on life, it had changed the very nature of how he would serve his country and his queen. Tomorrow, he would meet the Queen herself. But tonight, he would write his first letter to a brave little girl who had taught him that sometimes the most important thing a guard can protect is the human heart. 6 months later, James stood in his new position outside the palace's Family Visitor Center, a role that had been specially created following his encounter with Emma. His uniform was the same, his bearing just as professional, but his duties now included something unprecedented in the history of the Queen's Guard: officially sanctioned interactions with children and families who needed a moment of connection and hope. The morning sun reflected off the small brass nameplate that had been added to his uniform, Sergeant J. Mitchell, Family Liaison. It was a title that would have seemed impossible just months earlier, but it had become the most meaningful achievement of his military career. In his pocket, James carried Emma's latest letter, which had arrived just that morning. Her handwriting was stronger now, her words filled with excitement about her progress. The treatment had been every bit as difficult as the doctors had predicted, but Emma's indomitable spirit had carried her through the worst of it. "Dear Sergeant James," the letter began, "I have the most wonderful news to share with you. The doctors say my latest tests show that the treatment is working better than they hoped. I still have many months of medicine ahead, but they're very hopeful now." Mummy cried happy tears when they told us, and I thought, "You should know right away because you're part of my support team now." James smiled as he remembered the rest of the letter. Lena had written about the other children she had met during treatment, how she had started a pen pal program connecting sick kids with palace guards, and her plans for her next visit to London. "I've been telling all my new friends about my friend Sergeant James," she had written. "Some of them want to write letters to palace guards too, if that would be okay. We call ourselves the Brave Letter Club now. We write to people who have important jobs and might need encouragement, just like you gave me encouragement when I needed it most." The sound of approaching voices drew James's attention back to his duties. A family was walking toward the visitor center. Parents in their 40s, a teenage boy, and a little girl who looked to be about 8 years old. The girl was walking slowly, leaning heavily on a walker, and James could immediately recognize the signs of a child undergoing medical treatment. The family approached James's position, and the little girl looked up at him with curious eyes. "Mummy," she whispered loudly, "is that one of the Queen's special guards? The ones that protect everyone?" James smiled warmly, something his new position not only allowed but encouraged. "Good morning," he said, addressing the family. "Welcome to Buckingham Palace. I'm Sergeant Mitchell, and yes, I'm one of the Queen's guards. Are you here for a special visit today?" The girl's mother stepped forward. "We are, actually. Our daughter Lucy is. She's been going through some medical challenges, and we wanted to give her a special day out. We read online about the palace's family visitor program." James nodded, his heart warming as it did every time he met a family like this. "Lucy, it's wonderful to meet you. Would you like to hear some stories about the palace while your parents speak with our visitor coordinator?" Lucy's eyes lit up with excitement, and James spent the next 20 minutes sharing carefully chosen tales about palace history, the Queen's daily routines, and the important work that happened within the palace walls. Lucy listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions and showing the same kind of curiosity and courage that Emma had displayed during their first meeting. As the family prepared to continue their visit, Lucy looked up at James seriously. "Sergeant Mitchell, do you know other children who are sick like me? My mummy says I'm very brave, but sometimes I don't feel brave at all." James knelt down to Lucy's level, remembering Emma's words about heroes coming in all forms. "Know lots of brave children. I can tell you something very important. Feeling scared sometimes doesn't mean you're not brave. Being brave means doing difficult things even when you're frightened." He paused, then continued. "I have a pen pal named Emma who's about your age. She taught me that real courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to be kind and hopeful even when things are hard." Lucy considered this carefully. "Could I maybe write a letter to Emma? I think I'd like to have a friend who understands what it's like to be sick, but still trying to be brave." James felt his heart swell with the familiar joy he experienced whenever these connections formed. "I think Emma would love that very much, Lucy. In fact, I think you two would be great friends." As Lucy's family continued their palace tour, James reflected on how profoundly his life had changed since that first encounter with Emma. His new role had put him in contact with hundreds of families, each with their own stories of courage and hope. He had become a bridge between the formal world of the palace and the very human needs of people facing difficult circumstances. The afternoon brought its usual steady stream of visitors, but James's attention was caught by a familiar pink hat in the crowd. His heart leaped as he realized that Emma and her family had returned for their promised visit. Emma was walking on her own again, though still moving carefully. Her face had more color than during their last encounter, and her bright smile was as radiant as ever. She had grown taller in the past 6 months, and her eyes sparkled with health and energy. "Sergeant James," Emma called out, waving enthusiastically. "I'm back, and I have so much to tell you." James opened his arms for the hug he knew was coming, and Emma practically bounced into his embrace. "Ma, you look wonderful. I've been reading all your letters, and I'm so proud of how brave you've been during your treatment." Emma stepped back and struck a dramatic pose. "Look, I'm completely medicine-free for the first time in 8 months. The doctors say I'm doing so well that I only need to go back for checkups now." Emma's parents approached with tears of joy in their eyes. Her mother embraced James warmly. "Sergeant Mitchell, we can never thank you enough for what you've meant to Emma throughout this journey. Your letters and encouragement have gotten her through some of the darkest days." "She's gotten me through some dark days too," James replied. "Honestly, Emma changed my entire understanding of what service really means." Emma tugged on James's sleeve. "Sergeant James, I brought you something very special. I have a surprise that I think will make you very happy." Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a handmade book, carefully bound with colorful ribbon. "I made this for you. It's called Letters to My Hero, How a Queen's Guard Saved My Heart. It has all the letters I wrote to you, plus drawings, plus letters from all the other kids in the Brave Letter Club." James accepted the precious gift with reverence. Flipping through pages filled with Emma's artwork, photos from her treatment journey, and dozens of letters from children around the world who had heard their story and wanted to share their own experiences of courage and hope. "Emma, this is incredible. I will treasure this forever." "But that's not even the best part," Emma said, practically vibrating with excitement. "The really good news is that I'm starting a real organization, the Braveheart Foundation, going to connect sick children with people in important jobs who can be pen pals and provide encouragement." Emma's father stepped forward. "The Queen herself has agreed to be the foundation's patron, Sergeant." Emma's story inspired the creation of something that will help thousands of children and their families. James felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had grown from their simple connection. Emma's courage had not only transformed his own life, but had rippled outward to create something that would benefit countless others. And Emma continued, "I'm going to be speaking at schools and hospitals about bravery and kindness. I want other kids to know that being sick doesn't make you weak. It can make you stronger and more compassionate." As the afternoon sun began to set over the palace grounds, James realized that this was exactly where he was meant to be. Emma had taught him that true service wasn't about standing still and following protocols. It was about opening your heart to the people around you and allowing their courage to inspire your own. Emma hugged him one more time before her family prepared to leave. "Sergeant James, you'll always be my very first hero. Thank you for teaching me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply listen to someone who needs to be heard." As James watched Emma walk away, healthy and strong and ready to change the world, he smiled and touched the brass nameplate on his uniform. 6 months ago, he had been just another guard following orders. Today, he was part of something much larger, a network of compassion and connection that had started with one little girl's refusal to let illness dim her light. Emma had kept her promise to stay brave, and in doing so, she had taught everyone around her what true courage looked like. Now, it was James's turn to carry that lesson forward. One family, one child, one act of kindness at a time. The Queen's Guard had always been about protection, but Emma had taught him the most important lesson of all, sometimes the most valuable. Thing you can guard is not a building or a person, but the hope and dignity that lives within every human heart.